Her icy contempt tried to diminish me, but it only ignited the spark that would burn her empire to ash within 24 hours. The air in the grand ballroom was thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume. It was the kind of atmosphere I had learned to navigate, a battlefield of polite smiles and veiled intentions. As Amara Johnson, founder and CEO of Innovate Forward, I was a keynote speaker at the Global Philanthropy Summit. My company, built from a dorm room and fueled by ramen noodles and sheer will, was now a titan in the tech industry, dedicated to creating sustainable, accessible technology for developing nations. I was proud of what I'd built. I'd earned my seat at this table, a table filled with people who had inherited their fortunes, not forged them. People like Eleanor Vance. She was the matriarch of Vance Global, a sprawling old money conglomerate that had its fingers in everything from oil to media. She moved through the crowd like a shark, all pristine silver hair and a Chanel suit that probably cost more than my first-year operating budget. Her reputation preceded her. Ruthless in business, icily dismissive in person, and with a thinly veiled bigotry that the elite either ignored or quietly endorsed. I'd managed to avoid her all evening, but my luck ran out near the main stage. The event organizer, a nervous man named Arthur, caught my elbow. "Miss Johnson, a tremendous speech, truly. I'd love for you to meet Eleanor Vance." My smile tightened, but I kept it professional. "Of course." Arthur led me over. "Eleanor," he beamed, "this is Amara Johnson, the brilliant mind behind Innovate Forward." Eleanor Vance's pale blue eyes swept over me, a slow, deliberate appraisal that started at my shoes and ended somewhere over my shoulder. It was a look I was familiar with, one designed to diminish, to categorize. She didn't offer a smile, just a slight, condescending tilt of her head. I refused to be intimidated. I had faced down venture capitalists who told me a black woman couldn't lead a tech company. I had outmaneuvered corporate raiders. Eleanor Vance was just another dinosaur. I extended my hand, my voice even and clear. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance. I followed Vance Global's work for years." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. 100 conversations around us seemed to hush. Eleanor looked down at my outstretched hand as if it were something filthy. A flicker of disgust, so faint it might have been imagined, crossed her features. She completely ignored my hand, turning her gaze instead to Arthur. "Arthur," she said, her voice like cracking ice, "do be a dear and fetch me another glass of champagne. This one has gone warm." The snub was so blatant, so public, it was like a physical slap. The air crackled with the silent collective gasp of everyone who had witnessed it. Flashbulbs from the press photographers lining the room popped, capturing the moment forever. Me, with my hand hanging in the empty space between us. Her, with her back already turning away. My face burned with a hot, primal anger, but years of boardroom battles had taught me to mask it. I slowly, deliberately retracted my hand. I met Arthur's horrified gaze and gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I wouldn't let them see me crumble. I turned to Eleanor's rigid back. "Don't worry, Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice dangerously soft, but carrying in the sudden quiet. "I wouldn't want to dirty your glass." She stiffened, but didn't turn around. She simply walked away, leaving me in the wreckage of her silent insult. I held my head high, excused myself from the stunned onlookers, and walked straight out of the ballroom, the sound of camera shutters following me like a swarm of angry insects. Back in my penthouse suite, the facade finally cracked. I threw my clutch bag across the room, the sound of it hitting the wall, barely registering over the pounding in my ears. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was the public declaration that, in her eyes, I was still not worthy. That no matter how high I climbed, there would always be people like her who saw only the color of my skin. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Marcus. My head of cybersecurity, and the closest thing I had to a confidant. He was a genius, a phantom who could dance through firewalls like they were smoke. I almost ignored it, but he was persistent. I finally snatched it up, ready to bite his head off. "What is it, Marcus? I'm not in the mood." "You're going to want to be," he said, his voice tight with an excitement he rarely showed. "Remember how we were running deep dive analytics on potential acquisitions? I was running a diagnostic on Vance Global just for kicks." "And?" I snapped, pacing the room. There was a pause, then the sound of him typing furiously. "Amara. They're a ghost ship. The whole company. Their financials, their network security, their internal communications. It's all a facade. It's held together by a single, incredibly vulnerable, outdated encryption key. It looks like something her late husband put in place 30 years ago, and no one ever dared to change it." I stopped pacing. The fury in my chest began to cool, replaced by something colder, sharper. "What are you saying, Marcus?" "I'm saying," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "that the entire Vance empire is a house of cards, and I'm staring right at the card on the very bottom." A cold fire ignited within me, extinguishing the last flicker of humiliation. I looked at my own hand, the one she had refused to touch, and I slowly clenched it into a fist. "What do you want me to do, boss?" Marcus asked, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. I walked to the window and looked out at the glittering city lights, a city full of empires waiting to rise and fall. "Pull it," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "Pull the card." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, the only sound the hum of the server fans in Marcus's secret lair. For a moment I thought he might refuse. What I was asking wasn't just corporate espionage, it was a declaration of war. It was the kind of move that could land us both in federal prison if it went wrong. "Copy that, boss," he finally said, his voice a flat line of pure professionalism. "Consider it pulled." I didn't need to watch him work. I knew his process. He wouldn't be a bull in a china shop. He'd be a surgeon. He wouldn't just crash their systems. He would unravel them, thread by thread, starting with the one key that held the whole rotten tapestry together. I disconnected the call, walked over to the minibar, and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was perfectly steady. Sleep was out of the question. Tonight I would bear witness. The first tremor hit at 4:17 a.m. A single alert on my encrypted feed from Marcus. Phase 1 complete. Internal communications severed. It was elegant. No alarms would have been raised. To the skeleton crew working the night shift at Vance Global headquarters, it would just seem like their email and internal messaging system was down for unscheduled maintenance. Annoying, but not catastrophic. But it was the beginning. By severing their ability to talk to each other, Marcus had isolated every department. They were now flying blind, deaf, and dumb. By 6:00 a.m., as the sun began to cast a pale, grey light over the city, the media frenzy from the previous night's Handshake snub was reaching its peak. The photos were everywhere. My face calm and professional. Eleanor's, a mask of cold disdain. The narrative was writing itself. The forward-thinking, self-made black innovator versus the racist, old-money dinosaur. My PR team was fanning the flames with surgical precision, feeding choice quotes to friendly journalists about Innovate Forward's commitment to diversity and inclusion. The world was watching, seeing Eleanor Vance for exactly who she was. They just had no idea they were about to see her empire pay the price. At 8:30 a.m., the New York Stock Exchange opened. Marcus had timed Phase 2 to the nanosecond. The moment the opening bell rang, Vance Global's automated trading algorithms, now cut off from the company's central servers, began to malfunction. They started executing nonsensical trades, buying high, selling low, hemorrhaging millions of dollars every second. The stock, VGL, which had opened stable, began to twitch. Then it began to slide. Then it plummeted. On television, financial news anchors were scrambling, their faces a mixture of confusion and morbid excitement. Unprecedented technical issues plaguing Vance Global this morning. We're hearing reports of a total communications blackout within the company. Sources are describing the situation as utter chaos. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed, watching it all unfold on a massive screen, a plate of untouched room service breakfast beside me. This wasn't just revenge. This was a hostile takeover of reality. Eleanor Vance had tried to put me in my place, to remind me of an old world order where I didn't belong. I was showing her that her world no longer existed. It was a fragile illusion, and I was pulling back the curtain. My phone buzzed again. It was Marcus. "You're not going to believe this," he said. He sounded different. Not excited anymore. He sounded shaken. "What is it?" I asked, my eyes still glued to the screen as VGL's stock ticker turned a horrifying shade of blood red. "I'm in their deepest archives," he whispered. "The stuff that's not just protected by that one key, but buried under layers of sub-encryption. The family's private servers. I thought I'd find financial dirt, tax evasion, the usual corporate grime." "And?" I prompted, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "It's worse, Amara. So much worse." He took a shaky breath. "I found a file, a project file, heavily encrypted, dating back 20 years. It's labeled Project Nightingale." "What is it?" "It's not a business project," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "It's a medical file. Eleanor Vance's husband, Richard, didn't die of a heart attack like the official story says. He was in a vegetative state for the last 3 years of his life after a catastrophic stroke. According to these logs, they used his body for unauthorized illegal medical trials." The room went cold. "What kind of trials?" "Experimental neural technology," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "Technology they stole. There are patent files, research notes, blueprints. Amara, they stole the foundational technology for a neural implant from a young researcher who later died under suspicious circumstances." He paused. "I'm sending you the researcher's file now." A moment later, a profile appeared on my tablet. A brilliant young black woman, a rising star in biotech, dead from an apparent suicide 2 decades ago. Her name was Dr. Lena Hansen, and the core patent for the technology she had invented, the one that Vance Global had stolen and used in their horrific experiments, was the very same patent that my company, Innovate Forward, had independently developed and perfected 10 years later. It was the bedrock of our flagship medical device, the device that had saved thousands of lives and made my company what it was. Her stolen dream was the one I had unknowingly fulfilled. The blood drained from my face. I stared at Dr. Lena Hansen's picture, at her bright, hopeful eyes, and felt the floor drop out from beneath me. My entire success, the very foundation of Innovate Forward, was built on a ghost, a stolen legacy. The irony was a bitter pill. Eleanor Vance had snubbed the one person on Earth who held the legitimate claim to the very technology her family had plundered to build their dark secrets upon. The humiliation of the handshake felt like a distant, petty insult now. This was something else entirely. This was sacrilege. "Marcus," I said, my voice like stone, "find everything. Every lab report, every financial transfer, every memo connected to Project Nightingale and Dr. Hansen, and I want you to find her family." "On it," he replied, the grim determination back in his voice. The rest of the morning was a blur of calculated chaos. While Marcus excavated the digital tomb of Vance Global's crimes, I mobilized my legal and PR teams. The narrative had to be perfect. This wasn't just about a corporate takedown anymore. It was about justice for Lena Hansen. Vance Global's stock was in freefall. Trading had been halted twice, and the SEC was already launching an investigation into the market manipulation. Eleanor Vance was trapped in a burning building of her own making, and I was about to pour gasoline on the fire. At 1 p.m. we made our move. An anonymous encrypted data packet was sent to every major news outlet in the world, as well as the Department of Justice and the SEC. It contained the complete damning contents of Project Nightingale, the illegal human trials on Richard Vance, the doctored death certificate, the financial records showing the theft of Dr. Hanson's intellectual property, and, most damning of all, internal memos signed by Eleanor herself, authorizing the project to continue after her husband's initial stroke, driven by a cold, desperate greed to monetize the stolen tech. The story didn't just break, it detonated. It was a scandal of such epic proportions that it dwarfed the morning's financial news. By 3 p.m., federal agents were raiding Vance Global headquarters. By sunset, Eleanor Vance, the untouchable matriarch, was filmed in handcuffs, her face a pale, horrified mask as she was led from her Park Avenue penthouse. The Chanel suit was rumpled, the icy composure shattered into a million pieces. The image was a stark contrast to the one from the night before. This time there were no cameras she could ignore, no hands she could refuse to shake. Later that evening I sat not in a hotel suite, but in a modest living room in Queens. Across from me sat a gentle, gray-haired woman named Sarah Hanson, Lena's mother. Marcus had found her working as a librarian, living a quiet life, never knowing the true, monstrous reason her brilliant daughter was taken from her. I had come alone, not as a CEO, but as a woman paying a debt. I told her everything. I showed her the files, the proof of her daughter's genius, and the story of how it had been stolen. Tears streamed down her face, tears of sorrow, and finally of validation. Her daughter wasn't a victim of despair. She had been a casualty of immense greed. She always wanted to change the world, Sarah whispered, clutching a framed photo of Lena. They took that from her. No, I said softly, meeting her gaze. They tried, but they failed. I slid a folder across the coffee table. Inside was a legal document. Innovate Forward's entire medical division is built on the work your daughter started. It's her legacy, and it's time she was recognized for it. The document established the Dr. Lena Hanson Foundation. I was seeding it with a 50% stake in my company's medical patents, an amount valued in the billions. Her name would be on every device, every research paper, every hospital wing we funded from now on. The foundation, which her mother would oversee, would fund scholarships for young women of color in STEM, ensuring that 1,000 more Lenas would have the chance she was denied. Her name would not be a footnote in the sordid history of Vance Global. It would be a headline in the future of innovation. Watching the news that night, seeing Eleanor Vance's empire formally file for bankruptcy, its assets frozen, its name forever tarnished, I felt no thrill of victory. The rage had subsided, replaced by a quiet, profound sense of rightness. My phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Marcus. The first picture was the one from the gala, Eleanor turning her back on my outstretched hand. The second was a news photo from that afternoon. Eleanor in handcuffs, being guided by a black female federal agent, her hands held firmly behind her back. The message under the photos was simple: balance restored. I looked at the pictures, at the beginning and the end of the longest 24 hours of my life. Eleanor Vance had refused to take my hand, believing it was beneath her. But in the end, it wasn't my hand that brought her down. It was the invisible hand of a brilliant woman she had wronged decades ago, reaching out from the past to reclaim her legacy, and, in doing so, to finally, justly, take everything.